honestly, this sabbatical was life-changing. If I hadn't taken that time off and had tried to sell the business, I would not have achieved the outcome that I did. There is never a time where you feel that you can definitely take a month or two off, but I think you have to, even if it is recharging so that you can come back and replace yourself or find an acquirer.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Succession podcast, where we dive deep into the pivotal journey of founder CEOs who face the critical decision. Should you continue leading your business or bring in a new leader? I'm your host, Evgeny Shadchnev. As a founder coach and author specializing in CEO succession, I interview founders, chief executives, and investors who share their stories of navigating this transition. Today, I'm speaking with James McAulay, founder of Encore. Encore is a marketplace that allows you to book a live music band for an event, for example, a wedding. James founded Encore 10 years ago, straight after university. And when we spoke last January, about a year ago, James was still running the business, and he was in a really difficult place personally, at the edge of a burnout. Since then, he recovered from the burnout, sold the business, promoted an insider to run it instead of him, and he's about to start a job at one of the hottest AI companies in the world, ElevenLabs. So in our conversation today, we discuss how he left the company, stepped down as a CEO, sold the business, and why he couldn't have done it without taking a 2-month sabbatical, going completely offline. Enjoy the conversation. James, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm also good. Very much looking forward to the conversation because I know we've got a lot to discuss. I remember we spoke last January, exactly a year ago, and a lot has happened since. You sold your company, you're about to join another one, and so much more. So let's start with your story.
Should we just go straight back to a year ago? Is that where you want to begin?
Let's start with Encore, the company you founded a decade ago that you sold in 2024. What does Encore do?
So Encore is a marketplace for booking bands and singers and DJs to play at parties and weddings. So it's like an Airbnb for live music. And yes, I started that 10 years ago when I was just out of university.
So if I've got a wedding or an event and I need to find a live band, I can just go on Encore and see a selection of different options.
Yeah, we make it really easy to find exactly the band that you're looking for because there are lots of bands out there. We make it easy to find, the bands that are available for your date that are within your budget. And then we handle the payments and the contracts and the reviews afterwards. So it's a very safe and reliable way to book music for the biggest day of your life when you can't afford for anything to go wrong. Yeah.
And I always thought that you've got a unique background for this kind of business because you studied computer science at university and you are a musician. I know you play well. You're a professional musician.
Yes. It was the sort of it was the perfect marriage of my interests. Encore. I nearly didn't do computer science at uni, and I nearly went to music college to study the cello. But when I was about 17, I actually had an audition for music college and an interview for university in the same week. One was in London and one was in Glasgow, and I could only attend one of them. And so I had to ask myself, if I was given both of these places, which one would I choose? And I decided I wanted to study technology and keep music as a very strong passion and hobby. But I didn't want music to be the sort of source of my income. And that decision, I think, has worked out very well so far.
Yeah. And a hobby is an understatement because you released an album just a few months ago.
It's a bit of an understatement, I guess. Yes, the album actually is coming out this week. So I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to my music, and I've sort of been tweaking and fine-tuning the mixing of this album. But yes, I've written and recorded and performed my own music, and I've played cello, on the X Factor, on live TV as a session musician, and I've been on like big stages. So yes, I guess it's a big hobby of mine that sometimes pays me. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're a founder. So let's go back 1 year. Before you sold the company, before you left Encore, before all the changes of 2024. Take me to that point.
Well, my emotional reaction to that point is I would almost prefer not to, but we're gonna go into it. It was a very difficult time. So this time last year we were about 9 years into the journey, running a business that books musicians for events. Is actually quite a tough business to run in sort of normal conditions in peacetime. But when there's a pandemic that comes along and basically prevents all events from happening for a while, it makes life very difficult. So I would describe these kind of eras of Encore as like the golden days of 2014 to 2020, where we were a scrappy startup and we had a lot of challenges, but it was fun and the market or the economy didn't feel like it was actually working against us. Then there was 2020, which was just a complete shit show, to use a technical term. Then there was 2021, which was like kind of hard to predict, but slightly better. And then there was 2022, which was this kind of gold rush of everyone getting married, everyone putting on parties, and our business just kind of rocketed. And if you look at our like revenue graph, it's almost as if nothing happened in 2020 and it just sort of kept going. We like picked up where we left off in 2022. So coming into 2023, I'd been through these like booms and busts, and was about 8 or 9 years in, and I was just starting to get really tired. And I knew in 2023 that I needed to take some time off. And I'd heard from other founders that they had done, a short sabbatical. My co-founder had done a sabbatical, I think in 2022. He took 2 months off and he loved it. And he came back quite recharged. So in 23, I thought, this is my year. I'm going to, finish this fundraise that we're doing. And I'm going to take maybe just a month off. That'll be enough for me to recharge. And the fundraise, as all fundraisers do, took longer than we thought it would take. And by the time it was done, it was September. And my rough plan had been to go to Japan for all of October. But the only thing I'd booked was my flights, because all the way through the year, I thought, I don't know if this is actually going to happen. There's lots to do at work. And lo and behold, I closed the fundraise, sort of got back into the weeds of my business, and saw that there were some big problems that had to be solved, and I couldn't take even a month off. So I had to cancel the flights and cancel my sabbatical, which was very painful. It felt like a betrayal to myself, actually, to sort of go back on a promise I'd made for myself. And so this time last year, came into 2024 just completely worn out, completely sort of at the end of my tether. And we were still sort of, facing lots of big problems, as all startups do. And I basically couldn't take time off until about May of 2024. But I arrived in January 2024 completely worn out. And so I had to find a way to kind of grit my teeth and survive somehow. Well, I enlisted a second therapist for a while. I was doing some talking therapy with one guy and some very specific cognitive behavioral therapy with another therapist. And I signed up for a marathon and started running lots because it's good for my mental health and it just sort of helps me stay balanced. And I started doing like yin yoga and sort of exploring meditation just as a way to like cultivate some self-compassion for myself when I was, really quite worn out. I got to May and was able to take 2 months off work, but this time last year I was not a happy bunny, is how I would describe myself. Yeah.
And in the process, you were also, I imagine, preparing the company for an exit, or that was,
Yes,
or that happened later.
we were definitely thinking about it. The live music market it felt like it was becoming increasingly hard to forecast. It felt like in the UK, the cost of living crisis continued to sort of erode people's disposable income. And so a few years ago, when a couple might have spent, £2,000 or £3,000 on a band, that same couple might now be thinking, let's spend, £800 on a DJ. So it felt like this business was getting slightly harder to forecast and to run. And as, a founder of 9 years at that point, I was also thinking myself, I'd like to find, like a home for this company so that I might at some point be able to sort of step away.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were looking at the situation from two perspectives. On the one hand, you were trying to find a home for the business because the market was becoming increasingly difficult and hard to forecast. And at the same time, it was just difficult on a personal level. You've been running the business for 9 years at that point.
Yeah, they were definitely sort of linked. I think for me, I started the business pretty much like 2 or 3 weeks after university. And even at university, I had done internships over the summer breaks. So I'd never had more than about, a month off at uni. And then after starting Encore, the longest holiday I had was 2 weeks at a stretch. I always took my 25 days of holiday, but I wasn't able to take more than sort of 2 weeks consecutively. So it had been just a long time without a break. And I was starting to think, I think the best outcome for this business is that we find a larger company that is like more stable, I guess, and has, just more resilience in a market that feels like it's getting slightly more volatile. And yeah, as we'll get on to, we were able to find that home. Yeah.
And I remember you were also thinking about the succession. Who might be the right person to lead the company first in your absence while you're taking your sabbatical, but also maybe play a pivotal role after you step away?
Yes, I had actually been thinking about that for a while. From maybe like the 7th or 8th year at Encore, I was thinking in the back of my mind, if I was to step away from this business, who would take it on? Like who would run it? And I felt quite a lot of nervousness about the idea of a totally new entity coming in and sort of taking on this business. I also had one member of my team, Perrine, who had joined in 2019 as a customer support specialist and had just very quickly risen up through the company. And this time last year was head of operations and people. And about 2 years ago, I think I just started thinking about Perrine as the natural successor. But I didn't even sort of mention that to her really until some point last year. So yeah, I was thinking about it certainly for like the 2 years leading up to my sort of final exit from the business. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did that transition happen, or that handover happen?
Yeah, so I'll try and tell this story sort of concisely, and then you can ask me which bits are interesting. So the sabbatical was actually a very good test period for running the business without me. And I think it's an exercise, whether it's a sabbatical or whether it's just like a long holiday that founders take, I think it's an incredibly valuable exercise, because even before I went away, we started to audit every, decision that I was part of, every meeting that I led, even, just basic things like which logins do I have? Turns out I'm the only one that can authorize certain payments and I'm going to be away for 2 months. So like, what do we do so that payments can be made in a trustworthy way? So even before I'd left, we started to like change how the business was running so that it could operate without me. I did a lot of different handover documents. I filmed a lot of different Loom videos explaining, here's my decision-making process. Here's how I'm setting these company targets. And I also put together a diagram that I called like the solar system of Encore. And it was basically every single angel investor and advisor and person that I would lean on when I sent these investor updates or when I had specific challenges. And I shared this with my leadership team and with Perrine as well, and said, like, all of these people are available for you if you want help from them. You just need to reach out and ask, and here's their email addresses. And that was a big Miro sort of interactive diagram. So that was really enlightening before I'd even left. And then when I went on sabbatical, I was very clear that I wanted to completely switch off. I wasn't going to be consulted on anything. For all intents and purposes, I was dead for 2 months. And that gave Perrine the opportunity to run the business, and to see what it was like to lead the business. And I did actually say to her before I went on sabbatical, this is a really good time for you to assess whether you might enjoy doing this in the future. I didn't know at that point that I might be leaving, by the end of 2024, but I knew it was probably going to happen within a couple of years at most. And I was at the point where I wanted to start seeding this idea with Perrine, because either I would come back from sabbatical and she would say, that was really fun, and I think I could see myself doing that, or she would say, I don't want to do this. and I would have to go and find that sort of external successor. So yeah, I would recommend, all founders or CEOs at least try that exercise, ideally before you've hit, ultimate burnout. But it is a good antidote for burnout. Yeah.
And what was it like for you to trust the company to Perrine? Because I know that you had been working with her for 5 years, so you knew her and you trusted her. But being a head of operations and people and leading the entire business, that's a big step up.
Yeah, and I'll be very transparent and honest and say that I was nervous. I had implicit trust, and I knew that everything would be sort of done to the best of Perrine's ability and the leadership team's ability. But I was also, sat on the plane on the runway about to take off to Japan, still sort of thinking of like one or two things that I might have accidentally forgotten to share with them that were like mission critical. I remember sitting in Heathrow, almost missing my flight because I was putting together like a specific formula for one of my head of sales at the time. I was sort of showing her like how I do a certain calculation for targets, and I realized I haven't shared this with her. So I was definitely like apprehensive. But it was a great, I guess, just a great sort of leap of faith moment where I thought, I want this business to run successfully without me. It cannot hinge on me as an individual. And there is one way to find out like which parts might need some, tweaking and fixing. So yeah, it just required a leap of faith. Yeah.
And what happened when you came back? What was it like to re-enter the business after 2 months of being completely offline?
It was a very interesting experience. During that sabbatical, for the first month at least, I was mostly, I'd say, kind of off the grid, in that I was replying to friends on WhatsApp, but I was in a different time zone, so like I didn't feel like I had to sort of reply to people during the day particularly fast. I uninstalled social media from my phone. I started journaling every morning. I was practicing a technique called morning pages, where you wake up and just write whatever is on your mind for a couple of pages first thing in the morning. And I started to experience like a peace of mind I had never experienced really as an adult. And I was also exploring meditation at this time, and a good friend of mine was sort of guiding me in some meditations, and I actually went on my first meditation retreat right at the end of the sabbatical, like the final weekend from Friday to Sunday. I was on retreat. And then on Monday morning, I went back to work. So it was altogether just a very interesting experience. And returning to work, I guess it was quite eye-opening, because I did sort of notice immediately I think I described it as a sort of like crackling stress that kind of came into my consciousness again almost immediately. And I remember thinking in that first week or two, you know, I'm going to work very consciously to stay balanced and stay grounded. But within just a couple of weeks, you know, just that crackling stress of a startup was sort of back in my field. And I think I realized that also this company of 10 years had just a lot of sort of challenging experiences tied up in it for me. So if I'm honest, coming back from sabbatical, I think gave me the conviction that, you know, I want to leave this business in the next couple of years, but I was not going to just disappear. I wanted to make sure that it was extremely smooth. And then after sabbatical, when I got back and sort of got into the numbers and was sort of catching up with my CFO and my investors, we decided it was time to like find like an acquirer for Encore. And so I spent the next 3 or 4 months speaking to a lot of different companies and sort of running that process. So it felt like I went from sort of, quite intense burnout through to peace and quiet for 2 months of my sabbatical, and then like straight back into an exit sale process. So there was a little bit of whiplash for sure. Yeah. But that process was wrapped up by September. So it was about like three months end to end. Yeah.
And I know the feeling of coming back to running a startup after a meditation retreat. As you were talking, it brought me back to a few years ago when I went on a retreat myself, and there was such a nice peace of mind. And the first day in the office, I could just feel my peace of mind disintegrating with every meeting, with every Slack message, with every...
You're so right. Every single touch point just slightly chips away at that serenity. On the retreat, I had this moment where I was, I know this is a CEO podcast, not a meditation podcast, but there was a moment where I was sat in this purpose-built like Buddhist retreat center out in the countryside, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I was just looking at a tree. And for the first time in my life, I was actually completely content just looking at nature. I didn't need to be talking about it. Because we were in silence. I didn't need to be taking a picture of it. I didn't need to be running or cycling through it. I was just sat immersed in nature, perfectly content. And so to go from that state of mind on a Sunday to being in the office on a Monday is quite an interesting experience. I also think, like your team have expectations of you. You know, like the person they knew before I went on sabbatical was quite like under pressure and quite worn out. And I think they expected me to return and be a similar way. And I was actually like I tried to be a lot more sort of balanced and sort of mindful. But yeah, interesting experience for sure.
Yeah. And even though it's a CEO podcast, not a meditation podcast, I think meditation is super relevant to a lot of founders who might be watching or listening. I remember a few weeks ago, you wrote a really interesting blog post about an experience you had while running.
Yeah,
would you be willing to share?
I would. I'm taking a moment to sort of appreciate the difference between today and like where I was a year ago, because I feel like my relationship with meditation has been sort of like developing for 10 years, but the first 9 years were just like trying and failing to like cultivate a practice. And in the last 12 months, I feel like I've made like a lot of breakthroughs and progress. So to summarize all of that, until this time last year, I had occasionally tried, Headspace and Calm. And my view of meditation was when you feel stressed, you can turn on one of these apps, spend 10 minutes counting the breath and thinking of your thoughts as clouds, and then you might feel slightly more relaxed afterwards, and you can then go back to your stressful job and keep operating the way you were operating. Obviously, that's not how I view it now, but I could not make a practice stick. And the longest meditation I'd ever done by myself was maybe 20 minutes when I was feeling extremely confident. So this time last year, my main therapist, the one that I see now, is a Buddhist, and he suggested a yin yoga practice. And he explained yin and yang to me for the first time. I'll quickly explain for anyone that's not familiar, but yang energy is striving and trying to change what is, and yin is accepting and just kind of sees things as they are and just allows it to be. And I realized I'd spent my whole life in yang mode, constantly trying to change how things were or resisting reality. And I think a lot of founders can relate to that. If we didn't have yang within us, we would look at a market or a problem and think, it's fine as it is, doesn't need to be changed. So like yang is not evil, but you need the balance. And through yin yoga, I discovered sort of listening to my body and just, you talk about these soft edges in yin yoga. So in vinyasa, you might feel a little bit of discomfort and you try to push through it for progress. But with yin, when you feel even this kind of echo of pain, you pull back and just accept that this is where my body is today. So that was a very helpful practice. And I was doing that every Monday evening for about 3 months. And then on sabbatical, I really sort of committed to meditating most days. I did my first hour-long sit in a temple in Kyoto by myself. Funny story, I went there on the Sunday and it was very peaceful and serene, but it was 15 minutes before closing. So I thought I'll come back tomorrow and I'll do my first hour-long meditation. And Monday was cleaning day. So they had a vacuum and all these people were cleaning as if their life depended on it. And it was the noisiest temple I've ever been to. But I learned a lot by just trying to sit for an hour with this vacuum going.
That's cosmic irony.
Yeah, it felt like a lesson. There was definitely a lesson there. Meditation has really changed my relationship to my mind and my relationship to my thoughts. And I'm a big advocate, especially for people who are using their brains a lot, which is most people, but people whose job really comes down to clear thinking and decision making. As CEOs, it's not really about how many emails we send or how much effort we put in. It's really about making the right decisions at the right times with as much information as you can get your hands on. And I learned that people were really paying attention to my behavior in the office and my state of mind. And someone once described me as the sort of emotional barometer of the company, which I'm sure is not unique to me. I think as leaders, we walk into a room and if we look uptight, people wonder what's wrong. And if we seem at ease, they relax and they think, well, if James is happy, then things must be okay. I think, meditation it's especially during that sort of the sale process where, I'd have lots of calls and every call mattered. And every call was a sort of a bit of a dance and a negotiation. And there was definitely an element of sort of, not performance, but you're pitching, you're selling, and you're sort of painting this vision of the future. But you got to be really mindful of the information that you're sharing. You can't share too much too soon. I think meditation really helped me when I was going through that, I guess, kind of final process with the business before it was sold. Yeah.
And I remember in that blog post, You've described a specific breakthrough on a, I think, 5K run in the park.
Yes, sorry, that was your original prompt. So
I wouldn't be
There's,
drilling down into it so much if it went public, but it's already on your blog.
it's already there. No, you're right. It was a profound experience. There was I think he was a Buddhist guru called Sri Chinmoy, and he believed that running was one of the paths to enlightenment. And I think a lot of people see meditation as a way to take steps towards enlightenment or to wake up. But the first time I came across his writing and his sort of philosophy, it resonated with me so deeply because my state of mind after a good run is so different to my state of mind before that run. And I have had these sort of vaguely spiritual experiences on particularly good runs. So in this blog post, I do acknowledge and talk about all of the physiological and chemical reactions that are going on there with endorphins and oxytocin and serotonin and cannabinoids all sort of firing in the brain all at once. But yes, I did have this moment where I was really struggling with my ego during a 5K, during park run, actually. And at park run, they do a little chant. Some of them do a little chant before where they say, it's a run, not a race. And there are people like me who just ignore that and think, no, this is definitely a race. And so I wasn't running as fast as I wanted to. And my ego was thrashing around, coming up with all these stories about how I could have done better and how I was going to explain this to my friends and my coach who wanted me to run fast. And yeah, about maybe like 3.5, 4K into the 5K, I was able to sort of tap into what I guess I describe in the blog post as my spirit, the part of me that is not my ego. And I just sort of dropped into the present moment and sort of connected with my body and felt I could access as a well of energy that hadn't been there before. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, it's on my website. But I'm a big believer that running is a very, like meditation, is a very effective way to improve your relationship with your mind. Yeah.
And just for context, you are not just running 5K once in a while in a park. You are running marathons, Ironman races. You're running internationally. Like, it's not just a hobby, it's like a big hobby.
It's yes. Unfortunately, it's not one I get paid for. That's one that I spend too much money on. But yes, I discovered running when I was 16. I was in a boarding school and I had terrible insomnia. And I would be awake until about 5 a.m. most days and then wake up at 7 to go to school. And one of the kind of house staff in this boarding school said, why don't you come out for a run with me? And we only ran about 3K, maybe in like 20 minutes or something like that. But I got home and just fell asleep almost straight away and sort of learned that if my physical body was tired, then regardless of how active my mind was, I'd probably fall asleep. And yeah, that was a great breakthrough, and I'm so glad that I had that moment. And then I just fell deeper and deeper into this sort of running rabbit hole, and started doing triathlons about 5 years ago. And yeah, I do it sort of in a ratio of 2-to-1, 2 for the fun and the enjoyment because I love it, and 1 because it's very good for my brain, and I feel so much happier and more balanced when I'm exercising regularly. And again, just something I would highly, highly recommend to all, ambitious and high performing people who are trying to get the most out of themselves. There's a sort of paradox, I think, that the more energy you spend on exercise, the more energy you have available in your work. It doesn't really make sense. You'd think that if you were tiring yourself out, you would have nothing left to give at work. But if you get the balance just right, it's very like energy generative, I think.
You're inspiring me to go for a run later today.
You should. Well, I've
should.
been for a run. I've been to your place in Portugal, and you've got amazing scenery for running. So
Oh, yes.
if I was there, I'd be running every day. Yeah.
Yes, the trails here are amazing. So, James, if we go back to your founder story of going through a burnout and then selling the business to Mixcloud, what happened afterwards, after you found the acquirer?
Yeah. So when we were sort of, signing on the dotted line and we were getting the deal done, I genuinely believed at that point that I would stay at Encore for at least probably 18 months. And that I would, sort of ensure a smooth transition in the first few months, and then work with the Mixcloud team, and I would sort of just continue as CEO of the business. And I think that's what everyone was expecting to happen. I think what happened for me was once the adrenaline had worn off, like I had spent 10 years running this business, and yeah, in transparency, like the business had never quite been reliably profitable. Like we were a startup that was growing every single year, and the price of that growth was that we didn't quite hit profitability. That's 10 years of like an alarm bell going off in your head saying, we might run out of money at some point. And so I think I would describe it a little bit like when you've just done your sort of end of year exams at uni and you expect to be jubilant and you just you think you're going to go out and party for like a week, and you go home and you pass out for about 24 hours and then you just feel completely sort of like empty because you've spent everything. That's akin to what I felt. Within a few weeks of the deal closing, I think the adrenaline wore off, and I just thought, wow, I'm completely like knackered here. And so I did, I took a little bit of holiday afterwards. I went cycling in Mallorca and did some running in Lisbon, and it was really nice, and it recharged me. But I started to realize that the deal actually went through on Encore's 10th birthday, on my 31st birthday. It was a very symbolic and sort of significant date. And I had this moment where I thought, like, that was my whole 20s. Like, the first musician signed up on my 21st birthday, and the acquisition was completed on my 31st birthday. And I think I just started to realize that a decade was like a nice amount of time to be somewhere. But actually, I think my sort of curiosity for other things started to get louder, and I didn't feel guilty about it anymore. Before the acquisition, I was CEO of a business, and I had a duty and a responsibility as CEO, and to sort of fantasize about doing other things almost felt like premature, or just not something that I should indulge too much. But now that I had an acquirer for the business, and an acquirer that I like really respect and had looked up to the whole time I'd been building Encore, Mixcloud is one of the big success stories of the London startup scene, of like the London music industry. And if you told me 10 years ago, like, your business is going to be acquired by Mixcloud, I would have been delighted. I would have thought, that was the coolest thing ever. And it is. So then I thought, right, this business is in a good place. Maybe I can start to think about what I might want to do next. And over the sort of 2 or 3 months following, it just became clear to me that this was the natural time for me to step down, the natural time for Perrine to step up, and for her to do that, with the guidance of Mixcloud, and with a sort of subtly new direction for the business under Mixcloud's leadership, and it just all sort of made sense. I did feel sort of apprehensive about even floating that idea to Mixcloud, because we had spent the whole summer talking about how I would stay for, at least 2, maybe 3, 4 years. But yeah, Nikhil, who came back to Mixcloud as chairman of Encore, and I've known for many, many years, was really understanding of this. And when I floated this idea, he responded with a lot of compassion and understanding. He actually left Mixcloud himself as, I think he was CEO. He left 2021, I think. So he knew what it was like to go through that emotional journey. And he'd been there, I think, 10, 11 years before he stepped down. So yeah, I feel very grateful and fortunate that they responded with compassion. And from that point, it was actually a very sort of smooth process. Yeah.
And how did you think about your next steps? How did you think about maybe starting another company or getting a job or any other options available to you?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I remember at times during Encore, I would sometimes think like, what the hell am I going to do after this? As CEO, we are like a Swiss Army knife. You learn to do everything, but you don't feel like an expert, particularly in anything. You sort of learn enough to be dangerous and to get by until you can hire someone else who's better at it than you. And then you kind of breathe a sigh of relief because, you're not doing a particular part of the business anymore. You've got someone much better than you. So I remember having these conversations over the last 10 years with other founders, and we would say, not sure what I'm going to do after this. Like, am I employable? And I guess I started to do a bit of an audit of what I'd enjoyed at Encore and what I'd felt good at. I started to ask, which parts of the job almost felt like play. Where did I get into flow? I knew which bits I hated. So I guess I had a very clear idea straight away of like which parts I didn't want to do. But yeah, the first major question was, do I join a company or do I just go again and start another company? And I was very clear that I was not going to start another company straight away. So that was an easy decision. I do feel in my gut that I will start another company in the future, but I'm not rushing into that. So I knew I wanted to join a company. Then I asked myself, what size of company do I want to join? I could play to my strengths and I could join a company that's maybe sort of 10, 15 people and take them further. But what I actually wanted to experience was like a bigger company, ideally sort of 50 to 100 people, and to see what it was like to grow from there. So that helped me narrow down companies with product market fit and companies, of at least 50 people. And then I shared on LinkedIn that I was leaving Encore, and I wrote like a sort of farewell letter to my team that I shared on my website. And I just mentioned at the bottom of that post that I was taking some time to explore opportunities. And I had some very interesting opportunities sort of come to me as a result of that. And to come back to the, what would I want to work on? My initial thought was I would do product management because that's what I was going to do before Encore. I was going to be a PM. And I enjoyed any and all product work that I got to do at Encore. And so the majority of my interviews were for product positions. But then an opportunity came up for a growth role that involves some marketing, some SEO, some product-led growth. And it made me realize that effectively is what I'd spent all of my time doing at Encore. Like if any word was top of mind for 10 years, it was growth. I started interviewing for that role and they gave me a take-home task. We want you to design an email for a new fictitious product and show us a design in Figma and show us how you would, A/B test it and who you would send it to and how you arrived at this positioning. And it just came very naturally to me. And I would not have thought I'm a marketer, but over the last 10 years, I put like hundreds of emails together and ran so many campaigns. So yeah, I think as CEOs, or founders rather, we don't give ourselves credit for all the things that we do. And we think, I'm not a marketer, so I'm not sure I could do that. But actually, you've probably done it already. Yeah.
So the company you are about to join is ElevenLabs, one of the hottest artificial intelligence startups out there. To what extent AI played into your thinking, given this is the biggest tech story of this year and last year and the year before?
Yeah, I've been using a lot of these AI tools myself for the last 2 or 3 years. I think certainly in the sort of the last year at Encore, I was probably referring to a mixture of ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity on an almost daily basis. I'd also just been exploring these art tools like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, and I was fascinated by them. And I remember sort of wishing I had a bit more spare time so that I could just like go deep on these tools and learn how they work. Actually, the concert that I put on of my music last year kind of combined everything I was fascinated in. One of my best friends led some meditation before the performance. And then during the performance, another very close friend, Fergus, had used these AI tools and other tools to generate like moving visuals for every track. And so we projected these sort of generative pieces of art onto the wall whilst we were playing music. So I've been exploring all these tools. And in 2023, I remember trying ElevenLabs for the first time. And it's one of those moments where you try out a piece of technology and you're convinced that it's magic.
And for our listeners, what does ElevenLabs do? What's the technology?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. They are very focused on text to speech and sort of audio models. So the tool that blew me away was I could just feed in some text and choose and customize a voice and hear it read out in a way that sounded almost imperceptibly human. I think, if I had heard that voice just on an advert in a podcast, I probably wouldn't have thought very much of it, but I was aware it was a tool, so I was sort of analyzing it. I fed one of our blog posts into this tool and had it read out by a sort of narrator, and I used another video tool that very quickly sort of found various images of what we were talking about. And I probably spent 20 minutes, and within 20 minutes I had like a 5-minute video guide on how to book a ceilidh band for your wedding, using all the content that we had researched, but with an AI narrator. And I was just blown away by it. And so I'd been following their progress sort of from the sidelines and just becoming increasingly aware that they were doing well. And so when I thought about, what I want to do next, I thought, I want to be in a space that I'm passionate about. And the AI market is also just a space that is growing very quickly. So yeah, I think it was a kind of natural blend of tools and technologies that I'd been curious about and playing with, and just the right opportunity coming up at the right time. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned you found this opportunity by posting on LinkedIn that you're open for future work.
Yes, I don't think ElevenLabs though was one of the ones that came to me. I think I reached out to a friend who had been one of the early employees there. My message said something like, hey, look, you might have seen that I'm moving on from my business of 10 years. I'm just wondering, I've always been fascinated by what you're doing. I'm just wondering if you have any roles that might be a good fit for me. So yeah, that one I sort of found myself. But my advice to any founder, and I was literally having this conversation with someone about an hour ago, when I was going for these roles, I don't think I filled out any job applications. I know from hiring myself that when you put a job on Indeed or LinkedIn or Workable, you get hundreds of applications, and I didn't want to be one of 100 CVs that someone was just like sifting through. So whenever I saw an opportunity, even if it was on a job board, I would find a way to speak to whoever I had the sort of closest connection to at the company, and that worked in my favor. So as founders, we do build up these networks and these these connections, and I think you have you have to lean on them if you want to get, a good chance at a good job.
And it sounds like that's a lesson that I keep hearing from other founders going through the same transition, that the network matters so much. Just applying on jobs on LinkedIn is not going to cut it. It's really finding jobs that are not listed, finding hiring managers who might not be obvious, finding just an indirect route, or maybe the most direct route, instead of going through a job HR channel.
I mean, one example of this, I saw a role come up at a fintech company on LinkedIn, and I think it had been posted that day, and it already had something like 70 applicants. And I thought, like, what are the odds that they'll get to, application number 71 when they come back to the office on Monday? And so I knew the founder. I WhatsApped him, and he replied in half an hour and said, okay, email this person and put me in CC. And within 2 days, I had an interview. I guess it is, it's not cheating, right? It's just sort of playing the game. Like, if you have a connection, you have to use those connections. And there were other opportunities that, I found, or people came to me with, as you say, that hadn't been posted yet. So they were aware that I was, available and looking for something at some point, and they had a plan to hire a role at some point. And so we were able to start talking before the role had even necessarily gone public or been shared. So yeah, just using networks is fundamental to finding the right opportunity.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And if you think about advice you could share with founders who might be in your situation like you were a year ago, before you sold the company, before you went on sabbatical, before you moved on, what would you like someone in your position a year ago to know?
That's a very good question. I mean, honestly, this sabbatical was, it was life-changing. If I hadn't taken that time off and had tried to sell the business, I would not have achieved the outcome that I did. There is never a time where you feel that you can definitely take, a month or two off and it's going to be fine. But I think you have to, if you've been in the game that many years, I think you have to try and find a way to recharge, even if it is recharging so that you can come back and replace yourself or find an acquirer. And related to that is just really investing in your mental health and your fortitude and your resilience. Because I've experienced what it's like to, get to the end of your tether, and it's just not a place that you can perform well from. So just finding whatever it is that recharges you, if it's Pilates or if it's running or if it's making music, just trying to keep making time for those things. I would encourage meditation and trying that. And my biggest advice actually for meditation is to find other people to do it with. I found that quite transformative. I was at the London Buddhist Centre last night and meditated in a room of about 40 people. And there's just something that makes you more likely to keep going if you're able to do it in the presence of others and then talk about your experience with them. So that helped me. I had one friend that I just talked about meditation with all the time, and it helped me cultivate practice. We talked about it several years ago as well, and I found that very inspiring. Yeah, and then on the succession point, which I know is one of the main focuses of this podcast, it's something that you want to start thinking about years before you're going to leave. Just trying to identify someone in your team that is high potential, that's on a sort of very steep growth curve themselves, and then just starting to give them more and more responsibility and have a dialogue with them about how they're finding that, and making sure that they are motivated, are enjoying the work, that they see themselves being there for a long period of time. That's all time very well spent. I don't know what it's like to find an external CEO, but I think I've read research that internal promotions tend to perform better. So I would just encourage all founders to kind of identify that top talent and then and nurture them and sort of prepare them for that. Yeah.
And start the process sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the best time to start that process is probably yesterday. Yeah.
James, as we're preparing to wrap up our conversation today, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
Yes, actually. One practical tip for, I guess, getting clear on what you want to do next as a founder and then sort of making your value proposition known is an exercise I went through and actually came up with myself. I made a pitch deck for myself because as CEOs, we've probably made hundreds of pitch decks. And I just thought, I remember someone saying to me, oh, you're going to have to put together your first CV since you were 18, 19. And I just thought, how do I capture what I've done in 10 years as a founder in an A4 sheet of paper? I can't. It would be reductive. So I made a probably 9-slide presentation, fairly straightforward. And it opened with, here's everything I've done so far, and here's how I can help grow your company. And it was, sort of showing graphs of the revenue growth that we'd seen and what I'd done to play a part in that. It was covering the various different responsibilities I'd had. One thing that was very effective was I included feedback from my leadership team from my 360 review. So I basically had a testimonials page, and obviously a 360 review has positive and constructive feedback. But in this pitch deck, I picked, the nice things that my team had said about me, and that I think was one of the most compelling pages of the deck, because it was other people describing what I'm like to work with. And then I said towards the end, here are the types of roles that I'm interested in, and the types of companies, because I assumed that this deck might get shared around. And I used a free version of DocSend, because when we're fundraising, we want to know how long investors spend on our pitch deck and which slides they're most interested in. So I got the same analytics for myself, and that was that I think just made it very easy to communicate what I could do and to stand out from the crowd. So I'd highly recommend founders make the pitch deck themselves, because it's quite a sort of reassuring process. You get to the end of it. Actually, I say I came up with this idea. My coach, Mika, suggested that I do this. But it's quite a reassuring process to go through it and realize I can do things, and I have done things. And it's a very effective way of showing that to other people.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you so much for sharing, James.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this has been a very fascinating conversation. So thank you for great questions.
To wrap up our conversation, I would like to share a few reflections. Maybe the biggest one is that sometimes the night is darkest before the dawn. When James and I spoke privately about a year ago, he was facing a number of genuinely formidable challenges on the personal and professional front. And if someone told James back then how much he would do and how well he would do it over the next 12 months, he probably would be really, really impressed with himself. And he should be. He managed to sell the company, promote the successor, take a 2 months sabbatical that really allowed him to recover, and find a great new place with one of the hottest AI companies in the world. And in particular, as we discussed in this episode, meditation and running played a big role in this journey. The effort that James put into looking after his mind and looking after his body also supported his work as a founder during this very difficult year. And as James said, he probably couldn't have done it without taking 2 months off for a sabbatical, taking it completely off. He was not contactable by the team at all. And of course it was difficult and scary. And at the same time, as James said, it was also indispensable. A few days before James went on the sabbatical, we spoke, and he wasn't sure how exactly he would be able to leave because he had so much to do before going offline, but at the same time, his absolute certainty that he was going to leave no matter what also gave him the clarity and energy to put everything in place to support the business while he would be away. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. And don't forget to like and subscribe on the platform of your choice. It really helps others to discover this podcast. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.